Chapter 1: The Firefly Clearing. Beneath an old moss-covered hill, where the earth gently sighs and the roots of ancient trees stretch deep into forgotten soil, lies a library with no end. There is no door to find it. It finds you. One evening, as the sky turned the color of soft lavender and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and dust, a traveler named Eleanor wandered along a woodland path. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She walked not out of need, but out of habit. The kind of walk one takes when the world feels too loud and silence is the only music worth hearing. As she stepped into a clearing filled with golden fireflies, she noticed a curious thing. The ground beneath her gave slightly, as though hollow. Kneeling down, she brushed away a patch of leaves and found a stone circle, etched with ancient runes worn smooth by time and weather. Without thinking, without fear, she placed her hand upon the center. The hill opened like a breath. A gentle staircase spiraled downward, lit by floating lanterns that glowed with the warmth of candlelight. No flame flickered, they simply shimmered, as if aware of her presence, guiding her deeper into the earth. At the bottom, Eleanor entered a vast hall lined with shelves that stretched so high and so far they faded into a misty horizon. Books of every shape and size filled the room. Leather-bound tomes, scrolls wrapped in silk, thin volumes bound in glass, and even a few books that seemed to hum quietly to themselves. There was no librarian, and yet the library welcomed her. She walked past rows of reading tables carved from single slabs of moonstone. Gentle music played from somewhere distant, perhaps from the books themselves, perhaps from the very walls. The air smelled of cedar, ink, and memory. One book caught her eye. It glowed a soft silver mule and bore no title. As she opened it, a breeze lifted her hair, and she found herself not reading a story, but stepping into it. It was a forest, deep and ancient, where animals spoke in whispers and trees told tales of stars. She wandered with a fox who wore a crown of frost, sailed across a lake of glass with a heron who knew the name of every cloud, and watched the sunrise with a bear who taught her how to listen to silence. Each time she closed a book, she returned to the library. But time never passed. The lanterns never dimmed. She could rest there, dream there, live 1,000 lives between two shelves, and still be exactly who she was when she began. And so, each night, she would descend into the hill, into the warmth and wonder of the library, and choose another story, another world to dream in. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely, if you follow the fireflies in your dreams, you too will find the place beneath the hill and walk among the stories that wait for you, patiently, lovingly, endlessly. Chapter 2: The Librarian of Echoes. The hallway deepened. Eleanor's steps slowed as the shelves grew taller, more ancient. The polished wood of the floor softened into something quieter, dustier. Each footfall muted as though the library itself wished not to disturb what rested here. Above her, the ceiling arched higher than before, ribs of dark timber holding silence in place. The golden globes of light flickered dimmer in this wing, casting the books in a low amber hush. She turned a corner and saw him. He stood behind a desk carved from petrified wood. its surface engraved with curling glyphs that writhed when not looked at directly. The man, or was it something else, was tall and slight, dressed in a robe of gray that shimmered like rain clouds stitched with spider silk. His face was half shaded by a hood, but she could feel his gaze settle on her like a hush upon wind. He said nothing. Eleanor hesitated. "Are you the librarian here?" The figure gave the faintest of nods and extended a long, ink-stained finger toward a row of shelves behind him. Then he turned, not waiting for her reply, and moved deeper into the wing. Eleanor followed. The shelves here held no titles, no authors. The spines were blank, but the moment her hand brushed one, words appeared, not printed, but whispered. They curled into her ears and unfurled behind her eyes. When she pulled one down at random, its cover seemed damp, as though tears had been shed onto the leather long ago. She opened the book. Inside were fragments, scenes from her childhood she had forgotten. A broken toy horse, the sharp smell of her grandmother's attic, a song hummed once on a train. Each page turned echoed deeper, memories she hadn't realized were hers, bound in ink that shimmered and blurred as though written by the memory itself. The librarian stood beside her now, though she hadn't seen him return. He held out another book. Its cover was colder, silver thread and rigid. When she opened it, the library faded away for a moment, replaced by a single instant, her 8th birthday. Sitting alone beneath the stairs, her cake untouched. She closed the book with trembling hands. "Let him? Why?" she asked. But the librarian did not answer. Instead, he gestured around them, to the shelves upon shelves of half-remembered moments, the silent chorus of forgotten days. "These are mine," she whispered. He shook his head slowly, then pointed at the next row. Eleanor stepped forward. Each shelf here glowed faintly. The books were lighter in her hands, and when opened, they played laughter, the sound of it bright and distant. These weren't hers. These were others' memories, echoing through time, looking for someone who would remember them. The librarian placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Eleanor understood. This wing of the endless library did not simply hold books. It listened. It remembered what others had let go. And now, so would she. Chapter 3: The Room of Unwritten Maps. The corridors shifted again. Eleanor had learned by now that the endless library was not bound by logic or linearity. Doors appeared where there had been none. Staircases turned inside out. Hallways looped and folded like ribbon in the wind. She followed instinct more than direction, guided by a gentle pull in her chest, a sense of rightness without explanation. It led her to a door with no handle, only a keyhole that shimmered like a drop of dew catching morning light. As she reached for it, the door sighed open on its own. The room beyond was vast and round, domed high above, with a glass ceiling that showed not the sky, but something stranger, a shifting canopy of stars, ink-black oceans, and drifting islands of light. Tables filled the space, each one covered in parchment, blank, untouched, waiting. A scent of parchment, ink, and something colder, like old wind, lingered in the air. At the center of the room stood a great brass globe, suspended in midair and slowly rotating, its surface unmarked. Eleanor stepped forward, drawn to the quiet hum that vibrated beneath her feet. She reached out to the nearest table, where a single sheet of parchment rested. As her fingertips brushed it, a fine line appeared, soft, wavering, like the first brush of a quill. Then another. A coast unfurled across the page. Mountains rose in dots and dashes. She gasped. The map was drawing itself. But it wasn't random. She knew this place, not from life, but from dreams, half-remembered landscapes stitched from sleep, a valley of silver grass, a staircase carved into the ribs of a whale, a village where the rain fell upward. Every mark on the page summoned a memory she had never lived, but somehow knew. She moved to another table. Again, the parchment awakened. This time it showed an island shaped like a sleeping child, a tower with no door, a forest where the trees leaned together to whisper secrets in rusted tongues. Eleanor wandered the room, each table revealing another impossible map, each one more personal, more intimate. She felt her heart beating faster, not in fear, but in awe. Then she saw it. A table near the far wall, lit by no lamp, held a single map already half drawn. She hadn't touched it. No one had. The lines were still moving. Rivers etched themselves into paper with invisible ink. Roads curled like vines. A tiny dot blinked near the bottom right, labeled only with a name in looping script, Eleanor. She reached out, and the globe above stopped spinning. The map pulsed once, and a new path appeared, a winding trail leading into unmarked space, into a region labeled in faint gray letters, the Forgotten Horizon. Eleanor looked up. Across the room, a previously blank wall now held a narrow doorway, arched and inviting. The map wasn't just recording her dreams. It was leading her somewhere. And she was ready to follow. Chapter 4: The Ink That Remembers. The doorway beyond the cartography room was small, too small almost, for someone to pass through upright. Eleanor ducked low, stepping into a narrow corridor that smelled of iron, rain, and old paper. A single lantern hung from a bent nail in the stone wall, its glow soft and steady, as though it had always waited for her. The passage curved downward. The air grew cooler, damper. The silence here was thick, but not empty, more like a breath held just before a word. At the bottom of the corridor, the walls opened into a chamber unlike any she'd seen before. It was neither vast nor small, not ornate nor plain. It simply was, like a forgotten truth finally spoken aloud. In the center stood a pedestal of black stone. Upon it, a shallow basin carved from obsidian shimmered, with ink not still, not solid, but rippling faintly, as though stirred by an unseen wind. It was alive. Eleanor approached slowly. She could feel the ink watching her, in the way a flame watches a wick. Beside the pedestal sat a single book, hand-bound, spineless, every page blank. She dipped a nearby quill into the ink. It tingled up her fingers, warm, then cool, then warm again. She wrote a single sentence, hesitant at first. Once, there was a girl who found a library too large for the world. The ink shimmered, the words sank into the page and then rose again, glowing faintly. From the surface of the book, a figure appeared, a silhouette drawn in liquid shadow. It turned its head, looked at her, and waved once before dissolving. Eleanor stepped back, startled. The story had moved. She turned the page and wrote more. A staircase of feathers led her to a room where no one remembered their names, only the stories they'd left behind. This time, the shadows climbed the walls. A faint breeze passed through the chamber. She could almost hear whispers, fragments of stories never told, or maybe long forgotten. Then she found it. A page halfway through the book already bore words. She hadn't written them. Her hand trembled as she read. "You found me again. I hoped you would. I don't remember the end. Will you help me write it?" Below the words, an ink blot pulsed once, then stretched into the shape of a child curled beneath a tree. No name, no face, only eyes that looked up from the page with a question. Eleanor touched the image. A flash, memories not hers, a kingdom built from threads of moonlight, a friend lost to a storm that never ended, a promise whispered under breath, "I'll find you again, no matter how long it takes." The book quavered, or words appeared. "Write what you remember. I'll write what I can." Eleanor sat down. For the first time in the endless library, she didn't feel alone. She dipped her pen into the ink that remembers and began to answer. Chapter 5. The Book of First Dreams. The ink room faded behind her, its gentle murmurs still whispering through her thoughts as she stepped once more into the drifting hallways of the endless library. Now the air seemed heavier with meaning, as if each corridor held its breath, watching where she would go next. She did not choose the path, it chose her. A curved stairwell spiraled downward like a shell, lit by soft, pulsing lanterns that flickered not with flame, but with memory. Each step seemed to take her deeper into herself. At the bottom, a door. It was made of pale wood, smooth and warm beneath her fingertips. Upon it, carved with tender precision, was a symbol, a child's eye, wide and unblinking. Beneath it, a single word, etched in a language she somehow understood. "Remember?" The door opened silently. Inside, a circular room hummed with quiet light. Shelves curved along the walls, but held only one thing, a single book on a single pedestal, bound in pale velvet. It looked soft, almost living. Eleanor approached, breath held. The title shimmered into view as she neared, The Book of First Dreams. She opened it. Light spilled out, not onto the floor, but into her. The world twisted, then unfolded. She felt the familiar vertigo of memory loosening from time. And then she was small again. No older than 4, standing barefoot on soft grass beneath a violet sky that never darkened. Before her stood a house made of glass and wind, with doors that opened like sighs and windows that blinked. She remembered this place, not from waking life, but from sleep, her first dream. But something was different. In the dream she'd once had, the house had vanished when she approached. She'd cried, afraid and alone. Now she stepped forward, and the door opened for her. Inside, the house whispered her name. Rooms formed as she imagined them, a tower made of buttons, a hallway of floating lanterns, a bed that rocked gently like a boat at sea. She touched things she had never touched, heard songs she'd only half remembered humming. And in one room there sat a version of herself, young, sleepy-eyed, clutching a faded stuffed fox. They looked at one another. No fear, no confusion, only recognition. The child Eleanor spoke softly. "You came back." "I didn't know I could," Eleanor whispered. "You can. We all can, but only once we remember what we were looking for." She reached out and touched her younger self's hand. In that moment, the dream shifted again. No longer a return, but a rewriting. The house grew roots. The sky turned golden. The fear that had once ended the dream never arrived. She stayed just for a while in a place that had once been fleeting. When she returned to the library, the book was closed. But she could still feel it beating faintly in her chest, like a dream not yet finished. Chapter 6: The Lantern Maker. The endless library shifted again, and the air grew dim. Not dark, never truly dark, but hushed, as if the sun had decided to rest just below the horizon. The ceiling above Eleanor melted into a sky of deep indigo, and the shelves gave way to narrow paths lined with moss and soft cobblestones. Shadows lengthened, not with menace, but with mystery. She followed the path without knowing why, drawn by a soft, pulsing light in the distance. It blinked like a heartbeat. And then she saw him. Bent over a long work table beneath a gnarled silver tree stood the lantern maker. His coat was patched with threads of gold and midnight. 1,000 tiny lights hung from the branches above him, swaying gently in the breathless dusk. Some flickered blue, others green or amber, but each one hummed with something more than light. They hummed with longing. He didn't look up as she approached, but spoke in a voice that creaked like old paper. "I thought you'd come sooner." Eleanor blinked. "You know me?" "I know your footsteps," he said simply. "Everyone leaves traces in the dusk. Yours wandered long, but true." On his table sat an open lantern, a delicate cage of bronze and glass. Inside, a flicker of pale starlight danced like a caught bird. Eleanor leaned closer, and for the briefest moment, she felt something inside it. Not hers, someone else's. Someone who had once wished to be seen, just once, before fading. "They're made from what people forget," the lantern maker explained. "Wishes, memories, regrets too small to hold, too strong to lose. Most drift away. I catch them." He gestured to the branches above. Each one waits for its story to be found again. Eleanor reached up toward a small purple lantern. It warmed beneath her fingers, then flared. She saw a child running along a beach, laughing, calling out to someone who never came. The image vanished as quickly as it arrived, but the feeling lingered. Salt air, sand underfoot, the ache of an unanswered call. "They want to be remembered," he said, "but they can't remember themselves." She looked around. Hundreds of lanterns swayed in the breeze of unspoken words. Why do you keep them? Because someone must. He placed the finished lantern beside her. Inside it glowed a soft white star, quiet and steady. This one, he said, is yours. Eleanor stared. The light within pulsed in time with her breath. She hadn't felt it leave her. She hadn't even known it was missing. What does it hold? She asked. The lantern maker smiled, eyes soft and distant. A hope you gave up long ago, but not forever. He pressed the lantern into her hands. Take it with you. Let it guide you. When it's time, it will show you the way back to what you lost. The dusk around her deepened, but the lantern in her hands shone brighter. Eleanor turned toward the path once more, carrying forgotten hope that now remembered her. Chapter 7: The Shelf That Sings. The hush of the lantern maker's realm faded behind her, though the light he gave her still glowed faintly at her side, swinging from a thin chain around her wrist. Eleanor wandered onward, deeper into the heart of the endless library, where the hallways began to narrow and curve like the inside of a conch shell. Here, silence felt different. Not empty, but expectant. And somewhere ahead, just barely above the hush, she heard it. Soft, like wind through reeds. Then layered notes joined it, richer, warmer, swelling in slow harmony. It was not a melody she recognized, yet it felt familiar, like something once heard in a dream and then forgotten on waking. The path opened into a long, narrow chamber, lit with bluish light that shimmered like moonlit water. On either side stood a single bookshelf. Not grand, not tall, just ordinary rows of books, except these books sang. Eleanor approached cautiously. Each spine vibrated with sound. Some buzzed with low tones like cellos sighing. Others shimmered with notes so high they almost tickled her ears. There were no titles, no markings, only sound. And as she stepped closer, the music shifted. It followed her. The books responded to her presence, changing key, adjusting tempo. A few notes repeated themselves, weaving a pattern. Eleanor reached out and gently pulled one volume from the shelf. The music swelled. As the book opened, it didn't reveal words. Instead, a soundscape poured out, a story told in rhythm and resonance. She heard a storm building over an endless sea. She felt the ache of parting through a single aching violin note, and beneath it all, a gentle lullaby hummed, one she knew without knowing how. She opened another book. This one sang of starlight over snow, of laughter echoing through empty houses, of a hand held tightly and then released. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. She had to know more. As she continued down the shelf, book by book, a theme emerged. Certain motifs repeated, familiar chords, half-remembered harmonies. Her life was in them. Moments she thought lost, emotions buried deep. The songs didn't tell her what to feel. They simply showed her what was already there. Then she reached the final book. It hummed a single persistent note, quiet, waiting. She opened it, and everything fell silent. A voice, soft and clear, rang out from the silence, not spoken. You are not a visitor here, Eleanor. You are the key. Her heart stopped. The book began to hum again, the same lullaby as before, only now it was coming from within her. The shelf answered, each book rising to join the harmony. The whole room swelled with music, a great and gentle chorus that filled the space like light. And at its center stood Eleanor. She closed the book, tears on her cheeks, the melody still echoing inside her chest. The singing shelf had shown her not just a truth of the library, but a truth of herself. She was not just reading stories. She was becoming one. Chapter 8. The Wind Between Pages. The melody of the singing shelf lingered behind her, notes still tucked into the folds of her thoughts like pressed flowers. Eleanor wandered on, quieter now, not in voice, but in spirit. The library responded in kind. The air grew thinner, softer, laced with something invisible but insistent, like breath held just a moment too long. She turned a corner and found herself in a room made entirely of open books. They floated mid-air, their pages fluttering like wings in slow, synchronized patterns. Some hung by thin threads of starlight, others spun gently of their own accord. The walls were gone, only parchment and wind remained. A gust brushed past her cheek, carrying with it a faint voice. Not words exactly, but the impression of meaning. She froze. Come closer, it seemed to say, but come quietly. She obeyed, stepping carefully between drifting pages, each one rustling with its own rhythm. The wind rose again, gentle and insistent, and this time it carried a question. Do you remember the promises you made to yourself? Eleanor's breath caught. She turned, trying to locate the speaker, but the wind came from everywhere and nowhere. Then she saw it, a single, closed book, resting on a pedestal of air in the center of the room. Its cover was thin and worn, bound not in leather, but in woven reeds that whispered as they shifted. She reached out and opened it. The wind surged. At once the pages exploded outward, swirling around her in a storm of ink and parchment. She felt herself lifted, not falling, not flying, but something in between. The world spun into white and sound. And then she stood on a vast plain of wind. It rippled like water, invisible but palpable, blowing in curling eddies across fields of blank parchment that stretched in every direction. Above her, pages drifted like leaves on an unseen breeze. Each one carried a voice, a memory, a secret, a confession whispered into the wind by someone who had once believed they were alone. Eleanor closed her eyes. She listened, not with ears, but with something deeper. The wind pressed close and murmured, "We remember the things you forget." It carried voices she didn't know but somehow recognized, a child whispering dreams into the night, an old woman repeating a name long lost to time, a younger Eleanor promising herself she would never be afraid of change. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from being known. You are part of the wind, it said, part of the listening, part of the keeping. The wind softened again, swirling gently around her before guiding her back. The floating pages gathered like birds returning home. The book closed itself with a final rustle. Eleanor stood alone in the quiet once more. But now she heard the wind even in stillness. And it heard her. Chapter 9: The Book That Grew. The wind had given her something she couldn't name, only carry. It rustled softly inside her now, a gentle reminder that not all voices need to be spoken to be heard. Eleanor followed its echo down a staircase of bound oak, spiraling slowly into warmth and green. The air grew thicker, fragrant with soil and parchment. Light filtered through as if through high branches, dappling the path with flickers of sun and shadow. She emerged into a small, circular room, more garden than library, though books still lined the walls like vines clinging to ancient stone. At the center stood a pedestal, and on it, it was large, ancient, its cover cracked and alive with veins of gold, but more astonishing than the book was what had grown from it. A tree, impossibly rooted in its center. Its trunk split the spine, winding upward with delicate strength. Its branches reached toward a skylight that didn't seem to be there before she arrived. And its leaves, each one bore ink. Eleanor stepped closer. The leaves shimmered faintly, and on each was a line of prose, a sliver of story. She reached out and touched one. It crumbled gently to dust. Another leaf unfurled in its place. A new line appeared. She touched the truth and watched it change. Eleanor opened the book beneath the tree. Its pages turned slowly, as if with breath. Wherever the tree had taken root in the paper, the fibers had shifted, swollen, cracked, grown around roots. And yet, the story continued, unbroken. She read. Once, there was a girl who wandered too far into a library that had no end. She thought she came seeking knowledge, but what she truly sought was becoming. She turned the page. The tree trembled. A small bud formed on one thin branch, swelling into a new leaf. Ink spread across it like veins filling with blood. Eleanor watched in awe. This was not a book written by an author. It was a book becoming itself through her. Each thought she had, each decision to turn a page or linger on a word, changed it. It slipped backwards. Leaves faded, flowers fell from the tree's crown like spent ideas. Stories that had been bloomed now shriveled into fragments lost to time, or perhaps simply waiting again. And then she turned forward once more. A blossom opened. Its petals were translucent, glowing with a sentence she hadn't yet read. She didn't know what the next chapter would hold, but she chose to turn the page anyway. Eleanor placed her hand on the bark. It felt warm like breath or memory. This was a book that lived, but only because someone believed in its unfolding. She smiled and whispered, "Grow with me." The tree rustled. More pages waited. The story was still being written by the ink in its leaves and the heart of the one who dared to read. Chapter 10: The Moonlight Archivist. Night had no true beginning in the endless library. It arrived like a soft breath, a hush that fell between the ticking of unseen clocks. Eleanor felt it rather than saw it. a shifting of shadows, a coolness on her skin, the slow blooming of stars behind the high arched windows that had not been there moments before. She wandered into a new wing she hadn't noticed before, where the walls were lined with narrow drawers and glass cases filled not with books, but with light. A thin, silvery glow filtered down from above, gathering in pools across the marble floor. The air shimmered faintly, as though the room itself was breathing moonlight. At the far end, a figure stood on a ladder, gently coaxing strands of light into a small glass jar. She was tall and slight, with hair like liquid silver, braided into a crown that glimmered with faint luminescence. Her robes whispered as she moved, woven from midnight blue and threads of starlight. When she turned, her eyes were pale and soft, like old paper that had soaked in dreams. "You must be Eleanor," the woman said, her voice barely louder than silence. "I am the Moonlight Archivist." Eleanor stepped forward, unsure whether to speak or whisper. "What is this place?" The archivist descended the ladder slowly, holding the glowing jar in her hands. "This is where the library keeps the books that cannot speak for themselves, those that have been forgotten or have forgotten themselves." She led Eleanor to a narrow alcove where a single book sat on a velvet pedestal. Its cover was blank, its pages were faded to near white. Not torn, not burned, just empty. "It used to be full," said the archivist, gently opening it, "but over time its story was lost. Too many dreams left unfinished. Too many readers passed it by." Eleanor reached toward the page, but the archivist held up a hand. "This book speaks only in moonlight, and moonlight speaks only in dreams." She unscrewed the glowing jar and tipped it gently. A soft silver mist poured over the open pages, curling into the air like incense. The blank paper shimmered, and then words began to appear. Not full sentences, not yet. Just flickers, names, fragments of places, bits of feelings, like memories half remembered upon waking. Eleanor closed her eyes, and then she dreamed. In her dream, the book whispered of a girl who wandered into a forest where trees whispered stories in their sleep. It told of a storm that had washed away every name but one, Eleanor. It showed her a hand reaching through darkness, not to take, but to offer. When she opened her eyes again, the book had changed. The first line had returned. This story was never truly lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. The archivist smiled, closing the book with a soft snap. "Sometimes," she said, "a story needs a reader more than it needs a writer." Eleanor nodded, her heart fuller than before. She had not only found a forgotten story, she had become part of its remembering. The moonlight dimmed, the dream faded, but the book remained. Chapter 11: The Hall of Forgotten Endings. The corridor found her more than she found it. Eleanor had followed a trail of melted candle wax, winding like a ribbon through the quiet aisles of the library, until the warm golden light gave way to something cooler, pale and still. The doors she passed grew narrower, the silence thickened, not empty, but waiting. And then, there it was. A tall archway, carved from driftwood and bone, stretched open before her. Above it, in faded ink and fractured script, was written, "The Hall of Forgotten Endings." She stepped through. The hallway stretched impossibly long, lined with pedestals that bore open books, each arrested mid-sentence. The pages hung suspended in a quiet sort of ache, as though the stories within had paused in breathless anticipation, still believing someone might return. Some endings stopped with heartbreak just out of reach, others with battles left unresolved. One book ended with the words, "She turned the key," and nothing more. The air smelled of dust and rain, of paper that had waited too long. Eleanor walked slowly, trailing her fingers across spines and covers, feeling the pulse of stories unfulfilled. Some whispered to her, others remained stubbornly still. She paused at a pedestal holding a small leather-bound book. Its title had faded entirely. She opened it, and as she read, something tugged at her chest. It was the story of a girl who had once dreamed of becoming a writer, only to lose her words after one bitter winter. The girl had filled page after page with silent letters no one could read. She had wandered the world, carrying her blank pages like prayers. And then, just as she found a place to begin again, the story stopped. No final chapter, no redemption, just a half-drawn sunrise and a closing door. Eleanor swallowed hard. Why was it left like this? A voice answered, not from behind, but within the walls, the paper, the ink. Because the writer did not believe it mattered how it ended. She felt it then, the invitation. A chair had appeared beside the pedestal. A fresh page lay at the book's end, ink and quill waiting. No instructions, no constraints, only the quiet plea of a story that wanted to go home. Eleanor sat. She dipped the quill in ink, let it hover above the page, and breathed. Then she began to write. The girl in the story found her words again, not all at once, but one by one, like fireflies returning to the night. She wrote in the dirt, on walls, in dreams, and eventually she wrote something so true it lit a path not just for herself, but for others who had forgotten how to end. When she placed the quill down, the ink shimmered briefly, then settled. The book closed on its own, a soft exhale of completion. The hall glowed faintly now. Somewhere in the dark, another story stirred awake. Eleanor rose, not knowing whether she'd finished the tale or if it had finished her. But either way, the ending was no longer forgotten. Chapter 12, The Clock Without Hands. Eleanor stepped cautiously into the quiet wing of the endless library that smelled faintly of old parchment and dust, settled like forgotten memories. The walls here shimmered as if they weren't quite real, edges wavering like the flicker of a candle flame. Above her, a grand clock hung, an ornate thing of brass and glass, but its face was bare. No hands, no ticking, just the steady pulse of silence. The books on the shelves around her felt different here. She pulled one from the shelf, a leather-bound volume with no title. As she opened it, the pages flickered, words appearing and disappearing in a breathless dance. The story began and ended in the same moment, a tale frozen in endless repetition. Every book she touched did the same, sentences looping back to their beginnings, chapters folding into themselves like origami without end. Eleanor's heart quickened with curiosity. "What is this place?" she whispered. She looked up at the clock again, the blank face feeling like a riddle. Time, it seemed, had fractured here, captured and frozen like a spider's web in a glass jar. She wandered deeper into the wing, where the silence grew heavier, pressing softly against her ears. Then, near the farthest corner, she spotted a small table holding a pile of empty books. Their pages were blank, waiting. It was as if the library itself was asking for a story. Sitting down, Eleanor thought about the strange clock, the books trapped in moments without flow. She realized that the library was missing something vital, the movement of time, the passage that turns beginnings into endings and endings into new beginnings. Her fingers traced the empty pages. Maybe, she murmured, this is where stories go when time stops. Closing her eyes, Eleanor began to speak softly, weaving a tale from the threads of her own journey, of wandering endless shelves, of meeting the whispering librarian, and the gentle magic of stories themselves. She told of a clock whose hands had stopped, but whose heart still beat strong, waiting for a story to bring it back to life. As her voice filled the quiet, the empty pages began to shimmer, glowing faintly with silver light. The clock above her stirred. First, a faint tick, then a slow, deliberate sweep as its hands appeared, moving gracefully around the face for the first time in what felt like forever. The books on the shelves pulsed with new life, stories breathing and growing, no longer trapped in endless loops. Time flowed again, folding and unfolding like the pages of a book, being turned by a gentle hand. Eleanor smiled, feeling a warmth bloom inside her chest. She had mended more than a clock. She had restored the heartbeat of this forgotten wing. With time restored, the library felt whole again, a place where stories could live and breathe, beginning and ending in their own perfect rhythm. Rising from the table, Eleanor looked once more at the clock, now ticking steadily. The endless library was endless, yes, but it was also alive. A universe of stories moving forward through the passage of time, and she was part of that endless flow. With a final glance, she stepped forward, ready to discover where the next chapter would lead. Chapter 13, The Rain Collector's Journal. The moment Eleanor opened the next book, a gentle rumble filled the air, a distant thunder rolling through pages like a storm gathering strength. She found herself standing beneath a sky thick with heavy clouds, rain beginning to fall in soft, silver drops that shimmered like tiny jewels. Around her, the world was muted, wrapped in the steady rhythm of rainfall. Ahead, a narrow path wound through a forest where leaves glistened wet and dark. Eleanor followed it, the air cool and fresh with the scent of wet earth. Somewhere, faint laughter echoed, soft and fleeting as the rain itself. Near a small clearing, she spotted a boy sitting on a mossy log, his coat soaked, but his eyes bright and focused. In his hands, he held a delicate glass jar, its surface catching the light of the storm. Around him, hundreds of slender tubes and nets were strung between branches like spider webs, collecting raindrops as they fell. Curious, Eleanor approached. The boy looked up, his smile gentle, but a little shy. "I'm Jonas," he said. "I collect raindrops." "Raindrops?" Eleanor repeated, eyes wide. "Not just any raindrops," Jonas said, lifting the jar. Inside, tiny flickers of light danced, soft, swirling glimmers that pulsed like whispers. These drops hold the last thoughts people have before they fall asleep, the moments when the world drifts away and dreams begin. Eleanor's breath caught. She reached out to touch the jar, and the tiny lights shimmered like fireflies caught in a jar of stars. Jonas opened a small leather journal, worn and water-streaked. The pages were filled with delicate sketches and notes, each capturing a fragment of a dream or a whispered wish. "I write them down," he explained, "so these thoughts don't vanish. They're too beautiful to lose." The rain fell harder now, each drop a soft heartbeat in the quiet storm. Eleanor sat beside Jonas, listening to the gentle patter and the quiet stories the rain seemed to tell. "Why do you collect them?" she asked. Jonas shrugged. "Because sometimes, in the smallest thoughts before sleep, there's a kind of magic. Hope, fear, joy or sorrow, all the things that make us human. If I can hold on to them, even just for a while, maybe I can understand the world a little better." Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight and wonder of his words settle deep inside her. She took out her own notebook and began to write, a story of rain and memories, of fleeting moments that slip through our fingers like water, but live forever in the heart. As the storm whispered around them, Eleanor realized that every story, even the quiet ones caught in a raindrop, was a treasure waiting to be discovered. When the rain finally slowed to a gentle mist, Jonas handed her the glass jar. "Take it with you," he said softly, "so you can remember the last thoughts of the world wherever you go." Eleanor tucked the jar safely into her bag, the tiny lights flickering like a promise. With the storm fading behind her, she stood and followed the path back to the library, her heart full of quiet magic and new stories waiting to be told. Chapter 14. The Whispering Inkstone. Eleanor's fingers brushed across a cool, dark stone resting on a low pedestal in a quiet alcove of the endless library. The surface was smooth and worn by centuries of use, etched with delicate patterns that seemed to shift beneath her touch. It was an inkstone, ancient, alive, and humming softly, as if it carried 1,000 whispers just beneath its surface. She knelt, intrigued by the faint murmurs that seemed to rise from the stone itself. Leaning closer, she heard fragments of words, lost languages, soft as a breath, floating in the air like drifting leaves. They were neither here nor there, forgotten voices, waiting for someone to listen. Beside the inkstone lay a stack of empty parchment and a slender brush. With careful hands, Eleanor dipped the brush into the stone's glossy surface. As the ink touched the paper, the whispers grew louder, weaving themselves into delicate characters that shimmered with meaning. She began to write, the brush flowing effortlessly, as if the inkstone guided her hand. The words formed stories she had never told, fragments of her own past she barely remembered, moments buried deep beneath the surface of her mind, scenes from childhood, forgotten dreams, faces she once knew but could no longer name. With every stroke, the pages revealed more of Eleanor's own history, not just as she recalled it, but as it could have been. The whispers of the inkstone seemed to bend time and memory, rewriting the story of her life in soft, fluid lines. A sudden warmth spread through her chest, a gentle tug like the pull of a long-lost thread. She saw herself differently now, not just as a traveler through the endless library, but as a story in motion, shaped by choice, chance, and the quiet magic of forgotten words. The ink shimmered on the page, alive and shifting. Some parts were clear and bright, others blurred and uncertain, as if her memories were still settling into place. Yet beneath it all, a deeper truth emerged. A story of growth, change, and the power to rewrite one's own path. Eleanor paused, brush hovering over the page. The whispers softened, inviting her to decide what to keep, what to change, and what to let go. With a steady breath, she smiled. This was her story to tell. Not fixed, not final, but fluid, an endless library of possibilities. When she finished, the inkstone fell silent, its whispers folded gently away. The pages before her held the new story, shimmering softly in the quiet light. Eleanor gathered the parchment, feeling lighter, freer. The past was no longer a chain, but a tapestry she could shape with her own hands. She rose, stepping away from the inkstone with a sense of peace. The endless library stretched out before her, an endless expanse of stories yet to be written, memories yet to be discovered. And she was ready to write her own. Chapter 15: The Final Binding. The heart of the endless library pulsed softly beneath Eleanor's feet as she stepped into the vast central chamber. A cathedral of books, where shelves spiraled upward like the ribs of a great beast, and lanterns hung suspended in golden light. Here the air shimmered with quiet magic, thick with the scent of ink and possibility. At the center stood a solitary lectern, carved from ivory and time-worn wood. Upon it lay a single book, large and bound in deep blue leather, the edges gilded with silver stars. The title, embossed in delicate script, read simply, "The Endless Library." Eleanor approached, heart swelling with a mix of wonder and reverence. She realized this was the story she had been weaving all along, the story of her journey through the library's infinite shelves, the tales she had touched and helped mend, the whispers she had gathered like fragile treasures. With trembling hands, she opened the book. The pages turned themselves, revealing every step she had taken, every story she had breathed life into. Yet the final page was blank, waiting patiently for her. A soft voice, like the rustle of paper, filled the chamber. "Every story needs an ending, Eleanor, and every ending is but a new beginning." She took up the pen resting beside the book, the ink glowing faintly in the lantern light. Her thoughts gathered like stars in the night sky, memories and dreams intertwining. As she wrote, the library seemed to hold its breath. The final page blossomed with words, simple yet profound, capturing the essence of a journey that was never truly meant to end. The cycle of stories and dreamers, of seekers and keepers, folded gently into the ink. When she laid down the pen, the book closed softly, sealing itself with a shimmer of light. The endless shelves around her seemed to sigh, the space breathing out a quiet, contented peace. Eleanor felt a gentle pull, a warmth that invited her forward. She knew her time in the library had come to a close. It was no longer hers alone, but a gift for the next dreamer to find, a place to wander, to wonder, and to write their own tale. Turning away from the lectern, she walked toward the library's shimmering threshold. The endless shelves stretched behind her, alive with stories waiting to be discovered, stories waiting for new hands to turn their pages. Stepping beyond the threshold, the world softened and blurred, and Eleanor found herself beneath an open sky, the sun warm on her face. The library was behind her now, an echo in the air, a secret kept between the stars and the dreamers. And as she walked forward, the story continued, not just hers, but everyone's. The endless binding of dreams and stories, forever turning, forever beginning anew.